Sports Talk Chicago. Here for Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's a Forbes sports writer, BBWA member, and a best-selling author. Please welcome Phil Rogers to the program. Phil, it's great to have you on. How are you?
John, I'm very good. I just want to stipulate, I have the Zoom set up where I'm looking out the window at the Utah mountains, so that's why my glasses look like sunglasses. I'm really not trying to be hip.
Hope I'm not interrupting you. You on vacation or something?
No, we spend quite a bit of time up here now.
Really? Okay. Well, what's your favorite part about being over there?
It's just gorgeous, and 2-lane country roads, totally different pace than all the years living in big cities, Chicago and Dallas. So it's just kind of nice to get to some quiet.
Let me ask you this to start. This really isn't a quiet topic. Where do you fall in the whole Josh Donaldson and Tim Anderson controversy?
Well, I think clearly Josh Donaldson, stepped in it and then tried to find a way to get out of it without coming across as a maximum jerk. And, racist is a super strong word. I mean, you really only know how people feel about other people, what's in their heart. Really, there is no way from the outside to know that. So, I think I would stop short of saying racist, but I mean, it was definitely stupid. And clearly his effort at damage control to say it was an inside joke between him and Tim, that fell flat. And, I thought Tim's home run on Sunday night there was probably the best, up yours kind of he could have given him.
Was one game the right suspension for Donaldson? Do you think there should have been one at all, or?
I definitely thought he would be suspended. If you look at Tim got one game for a one-finger salute earlier in the year, although he was then later to appeal it and get that removed. I definitely think there's standards of behavior on the field that, and when you cause benches to clear, I think the suspension was appropriate and it could have been longer. But whether it was one game or whether it was 10 games, the message was delivered, that, you can't go around just saying stupid stuff.
What do you think of Tim Anderson himself as a player?
I think he's a dynamic player who somehow lessens the appeal of his play with his personality off the field by being so visible, so front and center, it's okay to play with emotion, being the spokesman for this generation of players. I think that kind of keeps people from looking at how quick he's piling up base hits. He's almost a unicorn. I don't know if there is another player like him in the game now that just collects the hits. Critiquing his play, I think he could be a little bit better if he would find a way to work a few more walks. But when you're hitting 340, it's kind of hard to contribute, hard to criticize being a free swinger. And his defense is better than he's played this year. I don't know that it's Gold Glove level year in, year out. He makes a lot of really exciting plays, but he also mishandles some easy plays. But I just think he's a super dynamic player. I'm not sure people know how much power he has, that he's almost a flip the light switch 2020 guy that probably has a 30-30 season in him. But, I think he's kind of made his brand being, I'm visible, I'm outspoken, I want to sell the game. And in a way, I don't know if that somehow causes a lot of people to overlook just what he does on the field, and he does it night in, night out. He knocked wood. He hasn't had a lot of injuries and he gets on the field.
Do you think if he was quieter as a player, there'd be more fanfare around him?
I think people would look more at his play than, I wonder what percentage of his interviews he does is about his play on the field and what percentage is about social issues and, some of the candor rhetoric about the game and the big picture questions about building the game, growing the game. And I think it just that has become what people go to Tim Anderson for. And, I just wonder if that causes people not to study his game as much. Because, if you're a reporter and you have a chance to talk to him, you're not really going to talk to him about where did you develop your ability to be such a contact hitter. You're going to ask him a bigger picture question, looking for a soundbite that will hold up. And I think he's a great player.
Bill Rogers here on Sports Talk Chicago. Bill, what about the White Sox as a whole? How have you evaluated their season so far?
Oh, it's been hit and miss, and we tend to notice the misses more than the hits. They've really kind of rebounded well. The Johnny Cueto signing, was probably the best move made by any team since the season started. Patched a hole in the rotation tremendously well. Looks like he's going to be a big part even when Lance Lynn and the other guys get healthy. They really haven't had their lineup once again. I mean, we always seem to be talking about that. And, I think Eloy Jimenez now ahead of schedule. Luis Robert has avoided big injuries, but he did have a stretch where he was out but didn't go on the IL. Right now Grandal is a huge donut in the lineup whenever they play him. I think he's going to get hot and be okay. And I always trust Abreu. He gets off to slow starts. The fact that Memorial Day is right around the corner and he still hasn't really gotten everything together is a concern. And by saying he hasn't gotten everything together, he hasn't really gone on one of his two weeks, month stretches. He's very much due for that. But I trust him 100%. So I don't think we're seeing the beginning of the end with Jose Abreu. I know some pitchers have gotten some fastballs by him, and he's had some at-bats where he just looks unsettled. But I think, he's a 162 game player. And so let's let him get deeper in this. I think we'll start to see the regular guy. I think they're basically okay. The biggest question I have about him is the bullpen, which was kind of built up as a strength, but it's quickly gone through arms. And, I'm not sure it is the strength that it was. I wonder if, even though Cueto wasn't big money, after all the money that Jerry Reinsdorf and his ownership group has put into the team, will they have money there to go out at the trade deadline and acquire a significant left-handed reliever, for instance, if that's the part they deem they need? I'm not sure how they'll adjust. So I think, they're going to have to get some of their own guys pitching better, maybe find somebody in the minor leagues that can come up and contribute big in the second half. And it will help the bullpen to get the rotation solid because, they'll begin to get Velasquez back there, Reynaldo Lopez, maybe he becomes like Kendall Graveman, a big 7th, 8th inning type guy. But I think their lineup's going to be fine. I think barring more injury, their rotation will be fine. So I think the bullpen's kind of the question mark, whether it can achieve what was expected.
How do you feel about Tony La Russa's job right now?
I am a Tony La Russa backer.
Me too.
I think he's done a fine job. I think in the Tim Anderson thing, I think in all of the many tempests in a teapot that have come up in the season, he always sets the right tone, supports his guys. Not every decision he makes works out. Not every decision any manager makes works out. I can't really criticize him for anything, and you look at how Michael Kopech is pitching, the way that the White Sox have handled him, I think you give La Russa and his coaching staff some credit for managing those guys. So yeah, I think he's the right guy. But that said, he's hired for October. I mean, the reason that Jerry Reinsdorf and Rick Hahn went out and hired him was, here's a guy that has won in October. So we'll judge Tony by how they play in October. And if they didn't get to October, that would be a huge misfire. But I still think they're going to be okay to play in October, and that's when we'll judge Tony.
Is this team ready to win in October, though, talent-wise and experience-wise?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you look at Kopech, for instance. He hasn't made that many starts in the big leagues, but he'll be eligible for arbitration after this season. He's been around a long time. Yoan Moncada, some of these guys are starting to get close to free agency. We still talk about them being young. So I think they have plenty of experience and they have plenty of starting pitching. Lance Lynn's return will be watched closely because he's been an important guy for them. But I think, we got to get Dylan Cease right. You can't go out and have one good outing and get knocked out in the second or third, the next one, on a regular basis. But they have the arms to go deep in the postseason, and they certainly have the experience. And even though it's one thing he hasn't done, Jose Abreu, I don't know you can find a better veteran to build a team around. So yes, they definitely do. It's tricky judging in the postseason. I think the end of the Cubs Bryant, Rizzo, Baez era was judged by how they played in a handful of postseason games. And that's a really risky time to take the measure of a team. So the White Sox, had things clicked for them either of the last two falls, we would be talking about them completely differently. Even if they had just gotten to a championship series, which they were capable of both years, we would be talking about them. We would not have as much skepticism about them. So I think there's no reason they could not win. I mean, we saw in 2005 that team won the World Series, and they certainly didn't have a lot of pedigree going in.
Bill Rogers here on Sports Talk Chicago. Bill, you mentioned the Cubs. What do you make of their season themselves? Obviously in a rebuild, playing decent baseball as of late.
Yeah, to me, it's hard to watch. I mean, I don't see, today as we're taping this, we just saw Wilson Contreras hit a long home run. You don't know if he's going to be here, past the trade deadline. I don't see, I don't think you're going to win with Frank Schwindel and Rafael Ortega and Patrick Wisdom and the guys that played well last August and September. So to me, it's like watching the Cubs again in 2012, 13, 14, when they were kind of patchwork guys while their better prospects developed in the low minors. They're hard. It's a hard watch for me. And I'm still disappointed when I look out there and see, none of the brand names having, ownership having allowed them all to leave. Now, I know Kris Bryant just went back on the disabled list for the second time. I know Anthony Rizzo had a history of back problems, but they're no perfect ball players. No ball players are immune from injury. And I just can't get over those guys, what they contributed to that franchise to take it from where it was when they got there to where it was when they left. That ownership and the front office, although front office hands may be tied by ownership, but they were led along very quietly. Although we did see Theo Epstein leave a year early on his contract. Maybe he was the smart one, but it's just hard for me to see them sacrificing advantages they had, and I don't really trust that they're going to be able to recreate it in any short order.
So you didn't approve of those trades last year. Did you think it was time? Did you think they should have stayed? But what's your take on that part of it?
Well, I mean, I think you got to go back a lot farther. They shouldn't. all three of those guys should not have been allowed to go into last year unsigned. And it's their contract risk, and you might have to eat a contract. Jason Hayward remains on the roster, and somehow, I know they can't. They probably would have avoided that deal if they could have, but you've got to take some risk. And when guys deliver, it's just a little wrong to just break it up and not find the money, and we don't really detail, we don't know what how those negotiations went. A lot of that has been kept private, and that's probably appropriate. But I still go back to what Anthony Rizzo said after he was traded to the Yankees about the negotiations and the contracts, where he said the common denominator was none of us signed. Those were guys that were happy in Chicago. This wasn't like a standard Scott Boras contract or a player who's just pushing to get to free agency so he can test his value. Those guys, there were deals to be made, and for whatever reason, the ownership of the Cubs didn't want to make those deals. And so I wasn't blown away by what they got back in those trades, but I wasn't surprised, because if you're going to keep them, the Cubs played this the absolute worst way. You let these guys get right to free agency where their trade value is diminished, and then you trade them. The time to either sign or trade a guy going into free agency is the off season before free agency. There's no question about that. Maybe even 2 off seasons before. And there was a time not all that long ago, before Steven Strasburg signed his extension to stay with the Washington Nationals, when everybody thought he was going to become a free agent. Going back to that time, players were all signing extensions. It was really hard to think you're going to go into the market and get a top player, because they were all signing extensions. And that dynamic has changed, and more really talented players are getting to the free agent market every year. But there were deals to be made along the way. And Anthony Rizzo in particular got a really bad deal from the Cubs, because he signed that player-friendly contract in 2013. He had less than a year in the big leagues. Happy to do it, and never publicly said he regretted doing it. But he gave the Cubs so much more value than that contract was worth, and the Cubs never redid it. I thought with 2 years left on that contract, or even 3 years left, he had shown them he was the kind of player he was. And, he might not be Freddie Freeman, but he's not that far behind. And you look at how the Freddie Freeman deal, or you look at his first deal, he did reach free agency, but you look at his first extension with the Braves, treated in a whole different manner. And I just thought Rizzo deserved better from the Cubs than he got.
Long term, though, do you think the Cubs will benefit overall from all these moves? Do you think it ends up hurting them?
I think letting all of those guys go will hurt them. I think if part of what you would have paid, you could almost take any of them. I don't want to prejudice this opinion. Just take any of those 3 and say, you're going to keep this, you're going to pay this guy, and you understand you may be giving him more money than he will earn at the back end of the contract. But, you get a link to 2016, and you get leadership in the clubhouse. And Anthony Rizzo, when Kris Bryant came up, when Javier Baez came up, Addison Russell, Almora, all of those guys, not only was he the first baseman and the number 3 hitter, but he was like the greeter at the best restaurant you ever went to. He made those guys feel comfortable, and anything they wanted, they could go to him and ask. And, I'm not just saying this is Rizzo specific. I think Bryant could have done that. Baez could have done it. Baez did do that a lot for younger Latin players as time went on. But I just think you lose a lot. And yeah, the guy, it might be a smart move financially. Here's the question I ask though, John, when you say, will the team be better off? The next time they get around to trying to sign a John Lester, who bringing in Lester, that was the move that really started their rise to becoming one of the most relevant teams in baseball. When you get around to signing your next John Lester, are they going to be as eager to come to Wrigley Field as that generation of free agents were? Theo Epstein basically had his pick when he signed Zobrist. Any free agent he wanted, they all wanted to be there. And I think now they all ask questions to guys that were there. What's the deal with the Ricketts? What's going on at Wrigley? And, I don't know that they're ever, that's, to me, that's sort of out of the bottle and they're never going to get it back. And if you think back to before that run, the Cubs were never a destination for free agent players. I think they've made their lives for the next generation harder by allowing that kind of elan, panache they had built up by just giving that away.
Doesn't Alfonso Soriano count or no? I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
Yeah. Well, that's an example. They got him by overpaying everybody else. But yeah. I mean, you can go back and find guys. How about Milton Bradley? Did you like that one?
Oh my goodness, that was right.
And I think you're going to be back in that era where you have to wine and dine free agents that aren't universally attractive and try to convince them to come. And that's not a great situation to be in.
How likely is a Wilson Contreras trade right now?
It seems 80%. I mean, there's no reason they couldn't sign him to a contract extension. But when you get this close to free agency, as we saw last year, that becomes the least likely thing. And if he's not extended, he'll absolutely be traded. I mean, there'd be no reason really to keep him for after the trade deadline. And he might be a valuable piece this year if there's the right team in need of catching. He's certainly in the top half of catchers, and he could go a lot of places. And the Yankees, for instance, just to throw one out off the top of my head, but there are a lot of teams, and maybe they'll be able to get a good value for him. But it sure seems to me like he's next out of the door.
You think that's the right move?
No, I mean, he's like, I think even average big league players get undervalued because there's a sense that you can just go get another one. Well, a lot of times you can't. And then you look up, the Texas Rangers, and you thought you didn't think you were ever rebuilding, but you haven't won forever. So I think, I think they're better off to sign him. He's still, if he was older, I know he's had some physical issues, but he's always caught 110, 115 games. Now with the DH, you could make life a little easier on him by bringing in a guy like Yan Gomes. I would, if looking for the good of the Cubs, and also let me mention, they have nobody else in line. His replacement, Miguel Amaya, had Tommy John surgery. So, there's a million guys you could go get, but you're not going to get a big league average catcher, and catcher is a pretty important position.
Bill Rogers, still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Bill, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, the best book you've written is what?
Oh, I'll split the baby.
Okay.
Bud co-writing Bud Selig's autobiography. I'm very proud of that book. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. I worked very hard to build a relationship with Bud where he would be open. I think people have read it and they can't believe how open he was talking about the low parts of his time in baseball, especially the steroid era. And we spent a lot of time working on that. And I kept digging and digging. And a lot of people may not like what he says, but he certainly addresses it. It's the first chapter of the book. So I was proud of that. And just recently, I was going back and looking at an Ernie Banks biography I wrote. It's called, cleverly enough, Ernie Banks, Mr. Cub in the Summer of '69. And I hadn't opened it up in quite a while. And I was looking at it, and it reminded me how hard I worked on that book and how happy I was when it was published, because there had not been another Ernie Banks book written since he wrote one himself when he was a player in 1972. And I couldn't believe that at the time that I was offered the chance to write that, because there's so many books written about the Cubs that there was not a Ernie Banks book. It just blew me away. And so if anybody ever want to know the legacy of Ernie Banks, it's in that book. And I'm proud to have told his story. It was he cooperated with me, but it was not a mutual project. So it wasn't like me and Ernie Banks, but he did he did he did interviews with me for the book, and we got into what he meant about racial relations in Chicago and things that I don't think had been really explored elsewhere. And since that book was published, Ron Rappaport, who was with the Chicago Sun-Times for a long time and is a really good writer, also has written an Ernie Banks book, and I would recommend that.
What kind of work goes into making a book like that, or like the Bud Selig one too?
It's just to do it well. And I don't want to knock this other book, but I wrote a book after the White Sox won the World Series in 2005. And that book was on a really tight writing and publishing schedule because the publisher wanted to get it out as quick as possible. So that, there are books like that that are an exception, but I think good books have got to be a labor of love on both parts, the authors and the subjects, because it's really time consuming, and you have to be, anybody I work with, I say, look, for this book to be any good, you've got to be open and you got to be honest, and you got to talk about the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. And, we might talk about, this was true with Selig, and not just steroids, a lot of other subjects. We would go over the same subject 5 to 10 times. And I'm sure he was thinking, haven't we already asked this? But he was pretty good about saying it. And when you go back in over and over, I think then that's when you start to get people to really remember the good stories. Oh yeah, this happened. And that, I think everybody, especially when you're talking about the past, everybody wants to give you what's right on top of their head and right at the surface. And you kind of have to just kind of jackhammer away. And if you have months to do the reporting, you can do that jackhammering a little bit of it at a day. You don't have to just go into a guy's office and try to break him down to get the good information. So it just takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of communication. But when the book comes out, I have 2 children, and next to those days, those are, when the books come out, those are the proudest days of your life. But as opposed to working for a newspaper or a website, when you finish a book, you can stick it on a bookshelf, and it's always going to be up there. So you want to do a good job, because the evidence is going to remain.
Bill, before we finish up today, last question. What's the funniest locker room moment you've been a part of in your career?
Well, there's an Ozzie Guillen story that I can't tell in fullness. Okay. But I will say that my time around Ozzie Guillen, and that started when he was a player and ran the whole time he was a manager of the White Sox. I consider him in a very positive sense an idiot savant, that there's something about him. He could be talking to you, John, and he would know everything else that went on in the building you were in. He had this peripheral vision that I've never seen before. And there was one day I walked into the White Sox locker room, day game in Pittsburgh, and there was players were involved in a group looking at something that in modern culture would be deemed inappropriate, to say the least. And I like in a split second saw what they were doing, and rather than stop, I just kind of kept going to the back of the locker room like, it doesn't interest me. And Ozzie looked up, he goes, like the fact that he recognized who I was and he like read my mind, and he goes, "What's the matter with you, Rogers? You from Texas?" Like that just covered all ground. Anything goes. But it to me, he just like bang, bang, and he did that all the time. And you could not pull one over on Ozzie.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure. Best wishes moving forward for the rest of this baseball season. Looking forward to the next time we chat as well. Enjoy Utah.
All right. Thanks a lot, John.